There are moments in a marriage when something small stops you cold. Not a fight, not a confession, just a detail that doesn't fit. A zipper partially open on a bag you didn't pack. A flash drive you've never seen before, sitting at the bottom of your carry-on like it belongs there. That was how it started for me. I had been married to Kevin for 6 years. We met in our late 20s at a fundraiser for a children's literacy nonprofit. I was volunteering. He was writing a check. He had the kind of quiet confidence that I'd always confused with steadiness. Turns out, those are very different things. We lived in a nice house in Naperville, Illinois, about 30 miles outside Chicago. Kevin was a senior director at a logistics firm downtown, and I had been a project coordinator at a mid-size marketing agency until 3 years into our marriage, when Kevin sat me down and said he thought it would be better if I stayed home. His words, not mine. Better. Better for whom I didn't fully understand at the time. His hours were brutal, he said. Travel was constant. Someone needed to hold things together at home. And I loved him, so I said yes. I gave up my salary, my benefits, my office with the window that looked out over Michigan Avenue. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things. By year 6, Kevin was traveling to Dallas nearly every other week. He said it was a major client, a distribution company the firm had been courting for 2 years. He explained the project, with enough technical detail that I never questioned it. I made dinner on the nights he was home. I kept the house. I handled everything. And I stopped asking the kinds of questions that feel too heavy to carry back an answer for. The week it all came apart started like any other. Kevin had a 3-day trip to Dallas, Thursday through Saturday. This time, though, he asked if I wanted to come along. I was surprised. He hadn't invited me on a work trip in years. He said there'd be a dinner event Friday night, something semi-formal, and it might be nice for me to be there. You'd enjoy the city, he said, which was a strange thing to say since we'd been to Dallas twice before, and I'd never particularly loved it. But I said yes, because saying yes had become a habit. I started packing Wednesday evening while Kevin was on a call in his office. I laid out my things on the bed: a black wrap dress, a pair of heeled sandals, casual clothes for Thursday, my toiletry bag. I went through my carry-on to make sure I had my charger and my earbuds and the paperback I'd been slowly working through for a month. And that's when I saw it. Tucked under the inner flap of my carry-on, the kind of pocket most people forget exists, a flash drive. Small, black, no label. I picked it up and turned it over in my fingers. It wasn't mine. I'd never owned one that looked like this. Kevin sometimes brought work drives home, but this wasn't his usual brand, and it wasn't in his bag. It was in mine. I set it down on the bed and stood there for a moment. Then I put it back exactly where I found it and zipped the pocket closed. I didn't say anything to Kevin that night. I went through dinner, through the dishes, through our usual evening routine, and I said nothing. But something had shifted inside me. Like a key turning a lock I hadn't known was there. The next morning, while Kevin was in the shower, I took his laptop from his desk and plugged the flash drive in. I knew his login. I'd used his computer before, when mine was being serviced, and he'd given me the password without hesitation, the way people do when they think they have nothing to hide. I opened the drive. There were 2 folders. The first was labeled with a project name I vaguely recognized: the Dallas client. Inside were spreadsheets, contracts, budget projections. Nothing I could make immediate sense of, but nothing that seemed alarming on the surface. The second folder had no label at all. I opened it, and I sat there for a long time, not moving. Inside were bank statements, personal ones, not corporate, showing a series of transfers I didn't recognize, large amounts, 6 figures, total, moved in increments over 18 months into an account I had never seen before. There were also screenshots of email conversations, and in those emails there was a name I recognized: Amber. Amber Reese was Kevin's assistant. She had been with his company for 2 years. I had met her exactly once, at a company holiday party, and she'd shaken my hand and said it was so nice to finally meet me with a smile that I had, at the time, read as genuinely warm. The emails were not professional. I closed the laptop. I unplugged the drive. I sat on the edge of the desk chair for a while, breathing steadily, the way you do when you're trying not to scream inside a house that's too quiet. Then I went back to packing. Here is what I understood, sitting in that chair. Kevin had put that flash drive in my bag on purpose. He hadn't forgotten it there. He wasn't careless. Kevin was never careless about anything. He had placed it there deliberately, in a pocket he assumed I wouldn't check, so that it would travel through airport security inside my carry-on and arrive in Dallas without going through his own bag. Because if something was in his bag and it was found, it was his problem. And if it was in mine, and it was found, it was mine. I don't know what he was afraid of, exactly. Whether someone at the firm suspect than strands and see whether there was something about this Dallas trip that made him nervous. Maybe he needed the drive to reach Dallas but couldn't risk having it on him. Maybe I was just the most convenient option. His wife, the woman he'd asked to stay home so she could be useful. I felt something go very cold and very clear in my chest. I looked across the room at Kevin's carry-on, already half-packed and sitting open on the luggage rack. Amber was flying with him. The same as every work trip, she handled his travel arrangements and usually flew on the same itinerary, booking her own seat under the company account. I already knew what flight she was on. I'd seen the itinerary Kevin left on the kitchen counter 2 days ago, and her name was on the confirmation. I copied nothing. I took no photos. I simply picked up the flash drive, walked to Kevin's carry-on, and tucked it into the interior zip pocket of his toiletry bag. Then I went downstairs and made coffee. At O'Hare the next morning, Kevin was on his phone from the moment we left the house. Amber was meeting us at the terminal. She lived closer to the airport. When she appeared at the check-in area with her rolling bag and her efficient posture, she smiled at Kevin first and then at me, the same warm professional smile from the holiday party. Kevin kissed my cheek and gave Amber a quick nod and started talking about the afternoon agenda. I watched how they moved around each other. I noted what I noticed. We checked our bags, passed through security with our carry-ons. My bag went through the scanner without incident. Kevin's went through and came out the other side, and the TSA agent paused. "Sir, can you step over here?" Kevin's expression didn't change much. He had the practiced calm of a man who travels every other week and knows the protocol. He said sure and stepped aside. I watched from a few feet away as the agent ran a secondary scan on his bag and then asked to open it. What happened next took about 4 minutes, but it felt much longer. The agent found the flash drive in Kevin's toiletry bag. At first, Kevin frowned and said it was just a work drive. The agent scanned it with a device I didn't recognize, some kind of detection tool. And then a second agent was called over. I don't know exactly what was on that drive. I hadn't had time to understand all of it, and financial crimes are not my area, but I knew it was enough. Enough to make 2 TSA agents ask Kevin and then Amber to step into a private screening area. Enough to make Kevin's controlled calm break open, just for a second, into something raw and frightened. He looked at me before they led him away. I looked back at him. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Amber stood with her arms crossed and her eyes down. She looked like someone who had just understood that a door she thought she could walk through had been locked from the other side. I picked up my carry-on from the conveyor belt, straightened the strap on my shoulder, and went to find a seat near the gate. I didn't get on the plane to Dallas. I sat in the terminal for a while, and then I took an Uber back to Naperville. I called my sister Donna from the car. She lives in Evanston and she is the steadiest person I know. And I told her what had happened, starting from the flash drive and working forward. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Okay, you come here." I went to Donna's house. I spent the night in her spare room, under a quilt our grandmother made, and I slept better than I had in months. Over the next several days, I learned more than I had ever wanted to know about the inside of my own marriage. The flash drive had apparently triggered a flag that looped in the airline's security team, and eventually, federal investigators, because the financial records on it were tied to something larger than Kevin's personal side dealings. There were irregularities in the Dallas client account that Kevin and Amber had been concealing together. Money moved through project budgets in ways that looked, to the investigators who eventually pieced it together, like a coordinated scheme. I was not part of any investigation. I was, it turned out, one of the people Kevin had assumed would never look closely enough to notice. Kevin called me from Dallas that evening. He'd been detained for several hours and then released, but the drives had been retained by investigators. His voice was controlled at first, and then it wasn't. He asked me if I had done something to his bag. "No," I said. "I packed my own bag." There was a long silence. "I think you should call a lawyer," I said. "I already have one." I had called Sandra Klein that afternoon. She'd been recommended by a colleague of Donna's, a family law attorney, with a firm in Chicago. I told Sandra what I knew. She said we had a lot to talk about, and we'd start with the financial disclosures. What we found, over the following weeks, was not pleasant, but it was not surprising. Kevin had moved a significant amount of money out of our joint accounts in the year before this trip. Slowly, in amounts small enough not to immediately alarm, into accounts I had no access to. Amber was a beneficiary on some of it. Their relationship had been ongoing for approximately 18 months, which meant it had started roughly around the time Kevin suggested I stop working. I thought about that a lot. The timing of it. Sandra said we had strong grounds for a divorce petitions based on dissipation of marital assets, which is a legal term for what it looks like in plain English. Your spouse spending shared money on a life they're building without you. The divorce took 11 months. Kevin's firm terminated his employment while the internal investigation was ongoing. Amber resigned before she could be let go. The federal case was separate from our divorce and moved on its own timeline. But by the time my divorce was finalized, Kevin had entered into a plea agreement related to the financial misconduct. I won't pretend any of this felt like winning. It felt like walking through a room where all the furniture had been rearranged in the dark. You know where things used to be, but you keep reaching for them and finding nothing. What I can tell you is what I built afterward. Sandra's firm helped me understand exactly what I was owed under Illinois divorce law, and the settlement reflected the years I'd spent managing our household, the career I'd paused, and the assets Kevin had tried to move out of reach. I didn't get everything I'd lost, you never do, but I got enough to start. I called my old agency, the marketing firm where I'd worked before I left. My former manager, Dennis, had been promoted twice since I left and was now a VP. I wasn't sure what to expect. Dennis said, "I was wondering if you'd ever come back." That was the best sentence anyone said to me that entire year. I came back part-time at first, then full-time 6 months later. I took on a client account that no one else wanted because it was complicated and slightly chaotic, and I handled it well because complicated and chaotic had become baseline. I'm good at my job. I was always good at my job. I had just forgotten for a while that this was something I was allowed to know about myself. My sister still checks in every week. She sends me articles about places she thinks we should visit, restaurants she wants to try, hikes she's scouted. She is relentless about this, and I am grateful for every single text. There are things I would tell a younger version of myself if I could. I would tell her that love is not the same as service. I would tell her that a person who asks you to make yourself smaller so that his life can be easier is not asking out of love. He is asking out of convenience, and those are not the same thing. I would tell her to keep her own accounts, keep her own credentials, keep the habits of her own life alive even inside a marriage. Because a marriage is made of two people, and not one person absorbed into another. I would tell her that the moment something doesn't fit, a zipper out of place, a detail that makes no sense, a small thing that pulls at the edge of your attention, she should stop. She should look. Because small things are often the surface of something much larger, and the women who survive are the ones who trust what they notice. I don't spend much time being angry anymore. Anger is expensive, and I have other things to spend on. What I have instead is this: a job I'm proud of, a sister who answers on the second ring, and the knowledge that I looked at something that didn't belong in my bag, and I didn't pretend I hadn't seen it. That was the moment everything changed. Not the airport, not the lawyers, not the 11 months of proceedings. It was that Wednesday evening in the bedroom, holding a flash drive I didn't recognize, making the decision to understand what it was before I decided what to do. I had spent years being the woman who didn't ask. I spent the rest of my life being someone else,